Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Collide, Direct Mail, and UpHabit. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net, the one, the only, Mr. Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hey, you're so formal. Have you done? Have you done anything that I should know?
Oh, you think I'm like I did something wrong, and I'm just kind of trying to get back in your favor or something? Yeah, no, you'll find out, I guess. Sooner or later,
God.
something will surface. And what have I done? I don't know. You'll have to just wait and find out. Federico, we have a new operating system.
Well, yes, we do. Catalina is out, and you've been, let's just say you've been quite busy writing about Catalina.
I have been. Every year, Catalina comes a little later than iOS, and now iPadOS, I guess. And so my fall season is a little longer than everybody else's.
I think you mean macOS comes later than iOS and iPadOS.
Did I just yes, I do.
You just said Catalina.
Oh, I do. Well, see, I've been thinking about Catalina like nonstop for weeks now. But yeah, yes, Mac OS tends to come later than the other two, and it did again this year. Apple told us sometime in October. It was relatively quick in October. We got it on the 7th, which was nice, I guess. I was ready to go on October 1st, but I did appreciate having a few extra days to go back over everything. But yes, it's been, it was a busy September getting that finished up.
You've been working on that review for quite some time. I know that you've spent several weeks going back and forth with developers to get your hands on betas for apps built using Catalyst, which is now called Mac Catalyst for some reason. The name has been updated by Apple, and we've been discussing the breakup of iTunes. It feels like since the beginning of App Stories, when we launched the show over 2 years ago, and now it's finally upon us with the removal of the iTunes app and the new media apps in macOS Catalina. So your review touches on all of that. And I think it's really, so here's my recommendation for our listeners. You've probably seen a bunch of macOS reviews this time around, and it feels like there's way more websites doing long form macOS reviews than iOS reviews. And so I've checked out a couple myself, Jason Snell's, and I've read Stephen Hackett's at 512 Pixels, and I've skimmed the Ars Technica one. And what's great about them is that each review takes a different angle. And I think John's angle here is very much in the context of what does Catalina mean for iTunes and Apple's bigger media strategy, and also what does it mean in terms of having some sort of, I think you mentioned a computing continuum between platforms. What does it mean to have Catalyst? What does it mean to have SwiftUI? And what does it mean to have the iOS and iPadOS and macOS? And so you bring forth this idea of Catalina being named after an island, almost ironically, because the Mac needs the exact opposite of being an island. It needs to be integrated with iOS and iPadOS, and it needs to provide users with a reason to keep using the Mac. And so I think your review is quite unique from that point of view and that perspective. I know that you care about iTunes a lot. I know that you care about Catalyst, what used to be called Marzipan before, a lot, and I think it shows in your review. So as a reader myself of your review, I think it was really, really, really good.
Well, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun to write, and it really just is one of those things that struck me all of a sudden when I was thinking about Catalina. The word Catalina has been bouncing around in my head for months now, and it kind of is true that the Mac has become something of an island that's separate and apart from iOS, even though, quite ironically, iOS is the basis has its basis in macOS. But they grew apart, and it's been a long time, right? It's been more than a decade that we've had iOS, and the two have grown apart. And now I think Catalyst is just one piece of the puzzle, but the whole idea, I think, with SwiftUI and Catalyst and a lot of these other initiatives is to bring all this back together and make it more a part of this continuum, as I call it. And the reason that it's important to the Mac is that it's just a matter of numbers. If you look at it today, there are a lot more users of the iPhone and the iPad than there are of Macs. And if you want the Mac to remain viable going into the future, you have to make it a platform that works for those people too, not just people who maybe started using a Mac, 10 or 15 years ago before iOS was a big thing. You need to be able to bring people both directions and for it to all kind of work together as one unit. And I think that that's what the purpose is. I mean, we can get into a little more deeper about Catalyst, but yeah, I mean, I'm not sure Catalyst is quite there yet. It's going to take a little time, but I think that that's where Apple's, pointing the ship at this point.
Yeah. And I just wanted to mention that, of course, if you're a Club Mac Stories member, you can get an ebook version of the review for free as part of your subscription. You will find it, as always, with our long form stories. There's an EPUB version available in your downloads area. And it's really the best way to read these stories offline with the Books app or with any other EPUB reader. It's also a great way to take notes as you go. I know that a lot of people do it. Maybe either my review or John's review, we're talking about some details or some tips and tricks, and it's useful to highlight that section and come back to it later. So if you're a club member, you can get an EPUB version. And again, John, congratulations. I know that you've been working on this for a long time, and I'm guessing that it feels good to finally have it out in the world.
It does. It feels really good to have it out. And the responses from readers has been really great. So it's been nice to see what everybody thought about it. And I'm just glad to be finished and kind of moving on. And at this point, really digging in really deep with Catalyst apps because I want to, there aren't a lot of them yet. And I think the quality runs the gamut, as you might expect, from not very good to really surprising and excellent. And so I've been testing a lot of apps over the past few days, and we'll be coming out with a string of reviews of them. I've already published one on Lear, which is an RSS reader, but there will be more coming. So I've got at least, 3, 4, 5 that I'm considering. I'm just kind of going through them methodically, taking some notes, and trying to get a big picture sense of where these different kinds of productivity and other apps are going, in order to I guess point readers in the direction of really what's best that's out there.
Yeah, I've been downloading some myself, and it's been really interesting to see the kinds of apps that are coming to the Mac App Store through Catalyst. But I wanted to ask you, John, what's and I don't mean to sound too technical, but what's the relationship between SwiftUI and Catalyst, because they are two separate technologies. And to me, it almost feels like they're trying to solve the same problem, which is allow developers to have the same app available on multiple platforms, but in radically different ways. Catalyst is trying to say to iPad developers, well, now you can bring your iPad app to the Mac. And SwiftUI is a way for developers to essentially design their interfaces via code and do it once and have that app be able to scale from the smallest screen, such as a watch, to the iPad, to the Mac, and eventually to, I guess, even the Apple TV. But what's the relationship between the two right now in Catalina?
Oh, there's definitely a relationship between the two and definitely some overlap. But they're different. First of all, SwiftUI is much newer and less capable for creating things like iOS apps and Mac apps at this point. It's probably best used at the moment for watch apps. It's also, as you said, it's geared towards dealing with interfaces and not with all the underlying code. So you could write a SwiftUI app that uses UIKit, which is the iOS frameworks for building iOS and iPadOS apps, or you could use AppKit, which is what is used to make Mac apps. So it's not one or the other when it comes to SwiftUI. And I think SwiftUI is a longer-term solution to making it simpler for developers to make apps across everything from the watch on up to the Mac. Right now, Catalyst strikes me as an interim solution in large measure, although not like interim in the sense of between now and next WWC, more like interim in the sense of maybe the next 5 years, because it's designed not only to deal with UI, but also the underlying code and allow you to take an iPad app and bring it over to the Mac. Now, it's very young too, like SwiftUI, although it is more capable because while you're seeing watch apps that are built only with SwiftUI, that's mostly what you're seeing right now. With Catalyst, there are more complex apps being moved from the iPad onto the Mac. And what's, I think, the most clever thing, and I think the most, I don't know, the thing that I'm the most optimistic about, I guess, about Catalyst is not only does it allow the iPad apps to come to the Mac, but it also encourages developers to make the best iPad apps that they can make, because in order to make them run on the Mac, you need to support the very latest iPad OS technologies, things like multi-windowing, which is everything we've been covering on Mac Stories in the past few weeks. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Collide. Collide is a new user-focused security Slack app. It messages employees when their security systems aren't as secure as they should be on a Mac, Windows, or Linux device. So with the Collide app, if a user has a device that isn't complying with security best practices, they'll get a notification with clear instructions on what's wrong and step-by-step instructions on how to fix it themselves. They can even confirm in real time that it's all sorted out with the interactive button inside Slack. Collide was designed with user privacy in mind, and that means a whole bunch of great things, like your users knowing exactly what data is collected about their devices, plus information on who can see that data and the option to look at the full source code of the agent that's running on the device. Collide is already used by hundreds of fast-growing companies that want to level up their device security without locking down their devices. Try Collide's new product for free for 30 days for your whole team. Just go to collide.com. Again, that URL, which I'll put in the show notes too, is collide.com. Our thanks to Collide for their support of App Stories.
We've also seen in this first wave of Catalyst apps, we've seen some developers already sort of complain about and point out all the flaws that the current first version of the technology has. There's been a really good article on Bloomberg. Mark Gurman has talked to a bunch of developers, to different developers of apps that have developers that wanted to bring their iPad apps to the Mac. And he also spoke with, I believe, Gameloft, who were the developers of the Asphalt 9 racing game that was shown off at WWDC, and it was sort of advertised as one of the games that could come from the iPad to the Mac with Catalyst, but Gameloft is still working on it, so it was not ready for launch. And there was also a really good article from James Thompson, he's the maker of pCalc. He wanted to bring pCalc to the Mac with Catalyst, but only if the Catalyst apps could be substantially better than the existing AppKit-based Mac app that already exists for pCalc. So Thompson decided instead to bring Dice by pCalc, which is the dice rolling sort of spin-off of pCalc's about screen to the Mac. And he shared a lot of details on exactly what is wrong with Catalyst right now. And essentially, I think it ultimately boils down to two core issues. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the first one would be a lack of documentation from Apple. And the second is just that the technology is very new and young. And despite the fact that Catalyst first showed up 2 years ago with the home and news apps in Mojave, it really hasn't improved as much as you would expect from a 2-year-old technology.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And all you have to do is look at a Catalyst app to understand it. And that's, really from my perspective in evaluating these apps, one of the things that's hard to judge sometimes is whether an app is lacking in a certain area because of the shortcomings of Catalyst, or whether it's a developer shortcoming. And oftentimes it is a Catalyst shortcoming. And no place is that better seen than in preference screens. So if you open up any Catalyst app and you go to the settings, it's usually, command comma to if there's a keyboard shortcut for it. In some apps, it'll just open up as kind of a popover that occupies a square in the center of the screen, very much like you'd see on an iPad, but it looks really out of place on a Mac. And if you were to try to screenshot that window, you would not only pick up the underlying window, but the preference screen too, because it's all part of the same window, which is unusual because usually in a Mac app, when you open up preferences, it's a separate window. So if you were doing a screenshot of preferences, it would just be the preferences window. It wouldn't be the underlying main window too. It is possible to create a separate window for something like preferences in a Catalyst app, and some of the better apps have done that. However, a lot of the controls that you would expect to see, things like checkboxes and little, I guess they're like pop-up menus where you click on it and it gives you an option of maybe 3 or 4 different things that you can choose from. Those are just not available. Instead of like checkboxes, which you'll see are a whole bunch of toggles, which are just like the toggles in an iOS app, but they look very out of place on the Mac because that's just not a control you see on the Mac. Another one, probably the most glaring example, is date and time pickers, which are the tumblers that you see on iOS. And those don't even respond to swipe gestures. So if you have a trackpad, you cannot swipe on the trackpad to spin the tumblers. You can if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel gesture or actual physical scroll wheel on it. You can spin it using that, but it doesn't even work with the trackpad. Instead, you end up, click, click, click to advance the date one day at a time. It's not a good way to pick dates in a task manager or something. So there's a lot of controls that are missing that are no fault of the developers who are making these apps, but they do make for an experience that's not quite what you expect or necessarily as good as you could get if the developers had more options and had more native controls on the Mac.
Yeah. And of course, developers, if they, we're going to talk about a few examples shortly, but if they want to truly optimize for the Mac with Catalyst, they at the moment they need to do a lot of custom work on top of what Apple ships out of the box. And so
that's right.
It'll be easy to see the difference, to tell the difference between developers that have really just followed Apple's basic advice of just enable just click a checkbox in Xcode and you will bring your iPad app to the Mac. And that clicking that checkbox does a lot. It removes a lot of work and enables a lot of features for free, but it doesn't enable the additional, the details and the small touches and those functionalities, those details that can make an app feel really Mac-like is what people would say, that it feels Mac-like. And so those things like keyboard shortcuts and the menu bar with multiple nested menus and tooltips, which you mentioned, I believe, in your Lear review, all those need to be enabled manually by developers. It's all custom work at the moment.
Right. I mean, I would explain it kind of like this. I mean, if you check that box, it'll make your iPad app run on the Mac, but it won't necessarily make your app a Mac app. There's a lot more work that has to go into that. And when we were at WWC, there's a marketing aspect of this, and then there's like the reality of this. And the marketing aspect of this, the bullet point that you see during the keynote is check a box and you've got a Mac app. It's more than that. And I think, to give Apple some credit, they did say that there's more to it than that, especially once you got behind the keynote and went to the sessions. There's definitely more said that needed to be done. But I think a lot of people took away from that the checkbox aspect of it, which I think is unfortunate because while it takes you a lot of the way down the path, it certainly doesn't take you all the way. And it certainly doesn't take you to a place that creates a really good Mac app. And I guess I would add a few other things to what you mentioned a few minutes ago about what the issues are. James did a really good job going through it. It is documentation. It's lack of sample code. But there are also business issues. You can't have cross-platform apps. You can't have a bundled universal app that's both a Mac app and an iOS app, which means you have to charge a new price for the Mac app, which that in some respects is a good thing maybe for some developers. That might make sense, but other developers, they want the Mac app and the iOS app to be one thing, to be one price that they charge so people can have the app everywhere. Same goes for things like in-app purchases and subscriptions. All this is kind of separate, so there's no good way to kind of combine it into a unified package. And on top of that, I guess two other things. One is games are going to have a hard time. I am not surprised at all that Asphalt is taking more time to put their, get that app out there, because the keyboard events cannot be recorded by developers in Catalyst, which makes it very hard to have keyboard controls for games. On top of that, you can't hide the cursor, so your pointer is going to be there in the middle of the screen while you're playing Asphalt 9. Hopefully Apple finds a way to get around that. That may not be a big deal for some kind of games, but for other ones, it would be a distraction. Plus, there's no test flight. And test flight, I'll tell you, this was a real problem when I was dealing with the Catalina review, right? Because first of all, iOS developers are used to test flight, and it's very easy for them. They just send a link to somebody like you or me, and we can download their app. And we know then, once we're in the test flight beta, all we have to do is go to the app, and we have the most recent version. We don't have to email the developer, see what's going on. Instead, while I was doing this, there was a lot of back and forth. I only highlighted 5 apps in my review, but there was a lot of back and forth with all those developers to make sure I had the very latest version that I was evaluating to put in the review. And even then, there was one change to one of the apps at the last minute that I had to deal with after the fact, because I didn't have the very last version before it shipped. So it's, that's a problem when you're dealing with the press, but it's also a problem just dealing with testing, because you don't want to, the days when you used to do this before you and I worked together, when you used to have to get betas, right? And it was just a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, and I've seen a repeat of that. You've been sending me a bunch of zip files containing builds of Catalyst apps. It hasn't been pretty.
No.
So hopefully Catalyst will be. But really, even beyond Catalyst, Apple should just have the same development toolkit that iOS and iPadOS developers have in terms of testing and distribution of betas that they already have on other platforms. It should be the same on the Mac. I really cannot believe that test flight for Mac developers still isn't here. That's just ridiculous at this point.
It is. I have it in the back of my mind that Apple, when they acquired test flight, said that it would be coming to the Mac, and it never did. I think they said that at like WWDC in 2014, maybe 5 years ago. And now it keeps advancing on iOS. Now you can even have the public links, which is great, because maybe you or I see an app on Twitter and there's a public link there, and we can just sign up for the beta without even having to bother the developer. It's really nice. But the Mac, you don't have any of that. People rely on hockey to some degree, but a lot of iOS developers, it's just not it. They haven't been through that process as a Mac developer, and I think it just makes their lives more difficult in ways that just shouldn't be necessary. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Direct Mail, an easy-to-use email marketing app designed exclusively for the Mac to help you create and send great-looking email newsletters. Email marketing is still an incredibly cost-effective way to reach your customers and to grow your business. And for the past 15 years, Mac users around the world have trusted Direct Mail to handle all of their email marketing needs. It's designed just for the Mac, which means it's fast, easy to use, and works great with the other apps and services you already use. With Direct Mail, you can do all sorts of things, like quickly and easily compose high-quality emails that look perfect on mobile and the desktop. You can also get in-depth campaign reports that show you who's reading, clicking, and sharing your newsletters. You can even grow your mailing list by creating email sign-up forms that you can drop right into your website or your Facebook page. And there's a whole lot more on top of that. They have real humans to chat with you live if you have any questions or support issues. And Direct Mail is the #1 top-rated email marketing app for the Mac with 5-star reviews on the App Store, GetApp, and elsewhere. The app is trusted by small businesses, nonprofits, schools, and Fortune 500 companies alike. And it's free to download to get started. Listeners of App Stories can save 10% off all full-featured pricing plans. Head on over to directmailmac.com/appstories to check it out. Again, that URL to get 10% off all full-featured plans is directmailmac.com/appstories. Our thanks to Direct Mail for their support of the show.
So let's go over some examples of Mac Catalyst app. I'm still getting used to the updated name. Some Mac Catalyst apps that we've seen, that we played around. Let's tell you what, let's dispense right away with the big brands that are doing Mac apps. I see two in our document. John, tell me about American Airlines and TripIt. What are they doing? What is American Airlines, really?
Yeah. I was intrigued by that one, and I downloaded it, and it's fine. I mean, you can look up flights, see schedules, that sort of thing. Sign in with your account if you have an account with American Airlines. What didn't work for me though is buying a ticket, which I would think would be the most important part to American Airlines. I mean, I could go and look at flights and see when they were going to take off and arrive, but I couldn't actually buy a ticket, which is kind of a problem. So that one's not so great. TripIt is another one. It's another travel app, and that's a service where you can, when you get your confirmation email from an airline, you can forward it to their service, and basically they parse through the email and get all your details into their web app in the past, or iOS app, so you can know when your flight's taking off, what times, dates, gates, all that kind of information. And they've created a marzipan. They've created a Mac Catalyst app that is really nice. They did a really nice job with it, and you can not only use it by forwarding your emails, but you can also just create a new trip right in the app itself by putting in the details. And then on top of just, airline takeoffs and landings and all that, you can add hotels and maybe, dinner reservations or other events that you're doing on your trip. So I was pretty impressed with it, and it all syncs up. And I haven't played with it a lot. I don't have any trips planned at the moment, but I did sign in and look at. It turns out I hadn't used TripIt since 2011, but I had used it in the past. And
but you've been traveling. You've traveled in the past 8 years, right?
I have, but I haven't used TripIt.
You've moved from Chicago a few times.
Yes, I have. I do leave my house once in a while.
Okay, you do. Okay, it's good to know.
Once in a while to even see you. And yes, TripIt still had all those old trips in there, though, which is, when you think about it, it's like, wow. I mean, you've had my travel data for a decade, and I hadn't even thought about it, but it's all still there. And I looked through some old trips, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I went to New York that one time in 2011. But yeah, it's a pretty solid app.
Very nice. All right, so let's go over a few great apps because there's some of them. PDF Viewer. I think this one is the premier example of a Catalyst app. It's got multiple windows. It's got annotations, custom toolbars, keyboard shortcuts. If you're a developer and you're looking for inspiration on what is possible with Catalyst today, I think PDF Viewer is basically what you need to look at. Maybe this one and Lear, which you already reviewed on Mac Stories. Right, exactly. There is a lot going on in PDF Viewer, more so than most of the Catalyst apps that I've looked at. And it's a perfect situation for a Catalyst app because PDF Viewer has been on iOS for quite a while now, and you and I have always liked it on that platform. But it was limited in the sense that it wasn't on the Mac. And while the Mac has Preview, which is a very good PDF viewer. I use it all the time. I really do prefer, when I can, to have the same app on both platforms because there's a little less friction when you're dealing with an app that is the same in both places. It's just, there's no real thinking about switching your mental model of, how do I sign this PDF in Preview versus how do I do it in PDF Viewer, or how do I, access the highlighter or whatever it is. And PDF Viewer,
the lion's share of its tools are there. They've got a special toolbar that drops down when you click the edit button. A whole new toolbar kind of unfolds underneath the title bar that shows you all the different tools, whether it's creating shapes, highlighting things, marking them up. It's very nicely done, and I think it is one that people should look at whether they have this need or if they're a developer and they're looking for ideas of the kinds of things that can actually be done. Now, a lot of those things I believe require dropping down into AppKit to add that functionality that doesn't come for free with Catalyst, but it can be done.
Carrot Weather. What can you? So this one I still have not installed, but I'm a Carrot Weather user myself on the iPhone and iPad. Should I install it on the Mac?
Well, if you check your weather on the Mac, I would say yes. I mean,
it's very that for if you know me, you know that's a very specific thing for me to do. Checking the weather on my Mac.
Okay. All right. Well, look, it's very much like the iOS version. It looks basically the same. And
so
again, this is
good.
Yeah, this is one where, there already was a Mac app for Carrot Weather, but it wasn't updated nearly as often as the iOS version. And so Brian Mueller, who makes the app, decided to switch on over to Catalyst because, hopefully that way with kind of a broader shared code base, he could then, update it more frequently. And it looks great. I mean, it looks a lot. It's basically what you would expect on the iPad, but it also has the benefit of a menu bar app, which is really nice. I mean, you can just click on that and get kind of the current conditions and other information really easily.
I installed Fiery Feeds.
Yes.
I bought it from the Mac App Store. It's the RSS reader that I use on my iPad, and I like it on the iPad a lot because it uses the 3-column view that really takes advantage of the widescreen. I've been using, this may surprise you, I've been using unread on my iPhone, just because I've realized that I really like unread on the iPhone for quick interactions and for the gesture-based controls. So I can control it all with my thumb, and I love that I can long press. So if I'm going through my RSS feeds quickly, but then I realize, maybe my girlfriend is calling me or I need to do something, I can long press on unread and mark as read everything that is above my finger. So I can continue going down my chronological list later. So anyway, I use Fiery Feeds on the iPad Pro because it really takes advantage of the screen. It's the same layout on the Mac, and it mostly works the same way. I have one criticism, actually two of them. First of all, and I think the developer is very much aware of this, for a $32 app on the Mac, there should be a free trial somewhere. You should be able to try it before you commit to buying the Mac app. But right. I like the developer. I like Lucas. I'm a huge fan of the power user aspect of Fiery Feeds, and so I just bought it. Whatever. I believe that this one is a bug, but when you resize the window on the Mac and you quit the app and you relaunch the app, your custom size does not stick. So you need to, if you're like me and want to use a big layout, you need to resize it every time you launch it. Which for a $32 app, it's not great. But I want to believe that it's a temporary issue and it'll be fixed with an upcoming update. But otherwise, it's pretty good. It's like the iPad version, but on a bigger screen.
Yeah, it is very nice. And one of the things that I like about Lear on the Mac is that it's a little bit more like Fiery Feeds in the sense that it actually has the 3-column view, as opposed to on the iPad where it's, you have your sources and your article list, but then when you tap on an article, it shows you it moves just an article view. So that's been nice on the Mac. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by UpHabit, the personal CRM that helps you create strong relationships with the people that matter to you the most. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management, and it's a tool that's used in business to make sure that you have the most up-to-date details and information about everybody in your business contacts. It helps you make sure that you're making the most of those relationships and that you have meaningful interactions when you communicate. These days, though, Everybody leads incredibly busy lives, and that list of people that you want to have better relationships with just keeps getting longer and longer all the time. That list of people stretches beyond the business world and into our personal lives. And UpHabit, it's built to help you bring the power of these kind of tools to all of those contacts. With UpHabit, you can set reminders, take notes, and tag contacts with any information you need to keep in mind, so nobody is going to slip through the cracks. UpHabit is a user-first platform. The folks at UpHabit believe that your data belongs to you and you alone. And they also listen to their users, making sure that they're evolving their platform to suit everyone's needs. UpHabit makes connecting with people you care about a part of your daily routine. Try UpHabit for free, and for a limited time, UpHabit is offering 60% off for all new subscribers on any plan that they offer. UpHabit is available on both iOS and Android, and you can learn more at uphabit.com/appstories. Again, that URL is uphabit.com/appstories to sign up and get 60% off any plan if you're a new subscriber. Our thanks to UpHabit for their support of the show.
Is there anything else? So we're gonna have a whole collection of Catalyst apps to talk about here on App Stories, because essentially, the show being called App Stories, we just got a whole new platform to talk about.
Yeah, we got a whole new category. Yeah,
it is impossible for us to, and also we don't want to burn through all of our new material in a single episode. So we're gonna revisit Catalyst. John is gonna review Catalyst apps on Mac Stories. And we're going to discuss them again, talk about a few more examples here on App Stories in the future. There's a bunch of things that we want to, as we mentioned last week, we want to try and talk about new and different topics. I have some weird and interesting ideas that I want to discuss. So, yeah, I've been thinking about accessories, my home screen, the shortcuts that I'm working on, a bunch of them. We want to do some interviews. So there's a whole series of episodes we have planned. But is there any last mention here before we wrap up the episode, John? Anything that you want to specifically point out?
Yeah, I don't think that we can finish this first episode without mentioning Lookup, because Lookup is a dictionary app that we're big fans of on iOS and iPadOS, and it's been brought to the Mac in its full glory. I mean, it's a fantastic app. I mean, you've got a built-in dictionary app on the Mac that is good, it's serviceable, but it's also very plain. And what I like about Lookup is not only is it a beautiful app, it's nicely designed, but when you go to a word, it includes everything in one view. You've got the definition, the thesaurus, Wikipedia entries, a bunch of different things, whereas those are all different tabs in Apple's built-in app that really hasn't, seen any changes for many years. Plus, you've got all the ability to save words into collections in Lookup, to do the quizzes. That is a very new feature on all platforms for Lookup. It's all there, and it works fantastic. Plus, they did go the extra mile. They did do the tooltips. They did do a bunch of other things that make it a special app on the Mac. And I think it's, alongside things like PDF Viewer, it's a really good example of what is truly a productivity app that is a Catalyst app. I mean, there's a weird tension with people who don't seem to understand or want to accept iPad apps on the Mac and calling Catalyst apps toy apps or media apps or whatever the semi-derogatory term is for those things. And it's just not true. I mean, I've gone through, and there are task managers, there are text editors, there are PDF viewers, there are dictionaries, there are all kinds of apps that are coming over. Some of them are simple, some of them are more complex. It's really the whole spectrum, just like you find already, both on the iOS App Store and on the Mac App Store. So I think it's an exciting time to be considering Mac apps. I really hope that Apple works hard on making Catalyst better for developers, because I have a feeling right now, to me, the apps that we're seeing that the best right now are developers who are very experienced veterans in the game and really could have done an AppKit app instead, but went down the Catalyst route. What I really want to see is for anybody, whether they're brand new to developing on iOS, on up to an expert, can, without a whole lot of trouble, move their app from the iPad to the Mac. That I think is the promise that we got at WWC. It's not quite the reality yet, but hopefully very soon it will be. All right, Federico, let's continue this talk because, as you said, we have lots more apps to cover. We've got some interviews coming up. We've got all sorts of things planned in the months ahead. I'm really looking forward to it. And I've got a lot more work to do digging into these Catalyst apps and getting the reviews up on Mac Stories. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again. That's Collide, Direct Mail, and UpHabit. And, of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram. He's at Viticci on both. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.